Okay. We are going to continue on a journey over here to the laws of Tevilas Kalim. And we're getting toward the end of the chapter. Still a lot to talk about. Okay. Maybe after this we'll go on to another topic in Jewish law, Jewish practice. Okay. So this is chapter 120 Kuf Chaf, law number 8. It's a fascinating conversation. You remember the three basic requirements for Tevilas Kalim? One is that it needs to be purchased from a non-Jew. It has to be acquired from a non-Jew. It has to be metal, and it has to foodware. Yeah. So one of those conditions is you have to acquire it from a goy, from a non-Jew. So you're only required to toivel your vessel if it was acquired from a non-Jew. This is negating a scenario where the non-Jew still owns the vessel and you're using it. In other words, if a non-Jew has a hot metal cup, whatever it might be, and you borrow it from them, or you rent it from them, either way, both cases, it still belongs to the non-Jew. It is completely 100% exempt from toveling. There's no need to tovel it. There's no reason to tovel it. You can use it. You're allowed to use it without toveling it. Okay. Of course, when borrowing and renting vessels from a non-Jew, it has to actually be a kosher vessel. If it's not kosher, you can't use it for a different reason. It's not kosher. So usually a new vessel from a non-Jew that belongs to the non-Jew, you're allowed to borrow it or rent it from them and use it without toveling it. Or you can borrow or rent a used vessel from them and you kosher it. The word is kasher, but you kosherize it. You can still use it without toveling it. So the author of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rabbi Yosef Cairo, he rules that if, try to pay attention here. If I'm a Jew, I buy a pot. Let's use the word pot because it's the simplest example, metal pot. I buy it from, not a pot, a knife. I buy a metal knife from a non-Jew, okay? A kitchen knife. Why do I buy this kitchen knife? Because I want to use this kitchen knife to cut boxes. Meaning, I'm not buying it to use it as a kitchen knife. I don't want to use it as a kitchen knife. I have no interest in using it as a kitchen knife. It's a particular kind of kitchen knife that I looked at and I said, this would be a really good box cutter. Better than all the box cutters I've seen on the market. I want to use this as a box cutter. Now, a box cutter is not something used for food. It's used for boxes. So the Shulchan Aruch says, if you buy a kitchen knife, which is supposed to be used for food, and you buy it with the purpose of not using it for food, rather you use it for a different function to cut boxes, you don't need to tovel it. Okay? The author of the Code of Jewish Law goes even further than that. If I buy this kitchen knife and I buy it to use as a box cutter, I don't need to tovel it. Essentially a box cutter at this point. If you, another Jew, were to borrow this knife from me, it's my knife. It looks like a kitchen knife, but it's really a box cutter, right? Because that's what I wanted it for. If you borrow it from me, you can use it as a kitchen knife without toveling it. Because I purchased it as a box cutter. I don't want to use it. It's not supposed to be a kitchen knife in my head. It looks like a kitchen knife. So what? You borrow that from me, it's my knife. The same way that when you borrow it from a non-Jew, it belongs to the non-Jew. It's his business. Non-Jew doesn't have to tovel his stuff. I'm borrowing from him. It's his thing in my hands. I don't need to tovel it. So to over here, if I have something that I've used as a kitchen knife that I'm using as a box cutter, and you borrow it from me, you're borrowing my box cutter and you're using it for food, you're essentially using it for something that it's not meant for, which is kind of weird because it's a kitchen knife. So you don't need to tovel it. This is the opinion of the Rabbi of Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. He's quoting his opinion from the Sefer, the book known as the Hagoyos Oshri. That is the Sephardic authority. We follow usually the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isilis, how you pronounce his name. He disagrees with this. He quotes the opinion of the book known as the Isser V'Heter Aruch. He somewhat disagrees with this. He says, okay, I buy a box cutter. I buy a kitchen knife, yeah? I buy this kitchen knife to use as a box cutter. If I want to use it now as a knife to cut bread, even though it's in my head, it's a box cutter, Ramah says, I need to tovel this knife, this box cutter, before I use it for food. I have to. Even if I want to use it, not because I want to change it into back into a kitchen knife. I say, you know what, this is not a box cutter anymore, I want it to use it as a kitchen knife. For sure, then you'd have to tovel it. The Ramah is saying that even if it's still a box cutter. This one time, I need a knife, so let me just use this knife. This box cutter. Oh, well, no, 1 second. You need to tovel that knife. Okay. The main commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, Shach and the Taz, mainly the Taz, he's very confused. Rabbi Moshe Isilis, he got the source of this law is, like I said, mentioned from the book known as the Isser V'Heter Ha'aruch. But the Isser V'Heter Ha'aruch says more than what the Ramah says. The Isser V'Heter Ha'aruch says, remember, there's guy A and guy B. I'm guy A, he's guy B. If I buy a kitchen knife, and I don't want to use it as a kitchen knife, it's a box cutter, I don't need to tovel it. If I want to use it for food, I have to tovel it. The Isser V'Heter Ha'aruch says, because if I, in theory, wanted to use it for food, in theory, I wanted to use it for food, I would have to tovel it. Therefore, when you borrow this from me, you have to tovel it before you use it for food. Since if I were, in theory, if I wanted to use it for food, it would be called obligated to be toveled. Therefore, when you actually want to use it for food, even though it's my thing and you're borrowing it from me, you want to use it for food, you also have to now go and tovel it. So tovel means tovel with a blessing. So if you have an opinion that's saying tovel with a blessing, you have an opinion that's saying the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't say anything about toveling it for the borrower. So in this case, the borrower would have to tovel it as a kind of a midway point. He would have to tovel it without a blessing. Regarding this idea that the Ramah mentioned, that if you wanted to use this thing that looks like a kitchen knife, but I'm using it as a box cutter, if I wanted to just happenstance, I need it as a knife right now, a kitchen knife, so I want to cut my steak or my bread, I would have to tovel it. This kind of doesn't really connect, but I decided to connect it, leading to a misconception regarding tevilas kelim, which is a very common misconception, and it needs to be addressed so people can do the right thing. Many people think, there's different theories where this came from, but many people think that when you buy a vessel that needs to be toveled, you're allowed to use it one time without toveling it. So you go to the store, you buy a set of knives, and oh no, there's no mikveh here, what do I do? Oh, right, I can use it one time, and then I'll use it for whatever I need it for, and then later when I find the mikveh, I can tovel it. But I can use it one time without toveling. This is a big mistake. It's a very big mistake. Remember, this is a biblical mitzvah. You can't play games with this. There's no such room anywhere to use a vessel that needs to be toveled once without toveling. You're not allowed to. We spoke about it in the first class on this topic, that it's a prohibition. You're not allowed to use a vessel without toveling it, even once. Where it came from, there's different theories. I don't know. I'll end off with a interesting story that happened with me. I was one time, we were staying in an Airbnb somewhere, and the Airbnb was owned by non-Jews. And it was a Friday afternoon, whatever, one thing led to another. We ended up coming back 45 minutes to Shabbos. And we needed to make food. We had the food available. We needed to heat it up. We needed to cook it somewhat. There was technically still time. The problem was the pots and pans in the Airbnb weren't kosher. The oven wasn't kosher. And also, so what are we supposed to do? We don't know why. Hashem arranged it. We got back to the Airbnb 45 minutes of Shabbos, and the owner of the Airbnb had left a brand new set of pots and pans at the front door for us to use. So there was no problem with kosher. The oven, that was a different discussion. It's not for today. But they're brand new. They were completely kosher. But what about the fact that you have to table them before you use them? What's the answer? We just learned about it. He wasn't Jewish. We were renting from him. We were renting his stuff. They are completely exempt from being tabled. We didn't need to table it. So it was a good Shabbos. Baruch Hashem. Wishing everybody a good night, and hopefully see you all tomorrow, God willing.